Yeah, I think we're good, man. Okay.
It's working. Does it?
Work for me.
Yeah. I've actually got like things to talk through. So I'm like, I could go way off piste.
I think we're going to schedule you through you today.
So we timed our second half, and it was like 2 minutes. So then at the end we're going to do some read out some of the tweets that we hope will fit. But yeah, I don't think we'll have
I always do this as fast as I can.
Hi, Kieran.
Let's go. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to London Accessibility Meetup number 28 today. Thanks all for coming out, foregoing the sunshine to come and sit in the basement with us today. So if you want to find out a bit more of the meetup itself, we're on Twitter at Ali London. We use the hashtag Ali London as well for any tweets that go out today. If you don't know, Ali is what's called a numeronym, which is a slightly unusual way of saying accessibility. So it's the A, the first letter of accessibility, and then the 11 characters, and the Y, the last letter. So yeah, Ali or A11Y, sometimes people say. Really underused resource that we have as well. We have a YouTube channel, and we don't have a nice custom URL because I looked up today, we have to ask YouTube, and if we are a good enough channel, then they might give us one. So we need lots of subscribers, lots of interaction. But at the minute, if you go on YouTube and just search for London Accessibility Meetup, you'll find it's in the region of about 40, 50 videos from the previous meetups, all captioned. So yeah, check it out. It's a really good resource for learning lots about accessibility. So a little bit about me. My name's Andy Ronksley. I'm a freelance accessibility specialist. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn as well if you want to find out a bit more about me. A few announcements that I want to make real quick. We started a bit late today, so I'm just going to go through these real quick. First one is a conference coming up in October called Accessibility Scotland in Edinburgh. we have someone from Scotland on the front row. Accessibility Scotland is quite a new conference. It's been going, I think this is the 4th year it's been running. They have a call for speakers at the minute. You have until the 31st of July, so you still have 9 days or so left to submit a talk. One of the good things about this conference is it's very low-key. They're very open to having new speakers, people with new ideas. So if it's your first talk and you have an idea, check it out. It's a very nice conference. It's very cheap as well, £60 for the day. Yeah, it's on October the 25th, I think, in Edinburgh. I'm going to bring up my lovely assistant for this part. Mario, can we get one of their handheld mics? I'm going to try one of these.
Hello? Is that working?
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah. So, hello there. I'm Catherine Moonan, and I'm an accessibility specialist working with Sainsbury's. And I work on the Luna team, which is our pattern library. So over the last few months, we've been investigating the placement of error messages. And when we investigated into what people were doing who were accessibility specialists or agencies, there were lots of different ways of presenting error messages. So we're running a survey, and you can find it on luna-error-position.netlify, netlify.com. And we've put some examples up there of error message positions. We'd love to hear from you about what you're doing. What we're going to do with that data is use it to develop a error messaging with best practices in mind. We're going to use a test with users with access needs, and then hopefully come back and share our findings with the community. So please do come and fill out the survey tonight or fill it out online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. If you haven't as well, check out the Luna Guidelines. It's a fantastic piece of work. I only became aware of it about 2 months ago, but there's a whole load of great stuff in there for building accessible websites. More surveys. Survey overlay today. Ali Carter from Capital One sent me a message asking if I could just give a shout out for another survey that they have running. They're looking for end users of assistive technology that might want to complete a survey to help them understand better sort of the range of technologies that people might be using when they're trying to use Capital One services. They're doing that in partnership with Sky and the Royal National Institute of Blind People. So again, we'll tweet these out after as well. Grab a picture if you want, or we'll put them on the Twitter account later as well. I think this is the final announcement. So a company called How Do I? Anyone heard of How Do I before? I have. About 5 people. That's good. So there's lots of people that don't know about it. So have a look at the website. They're called wearehowdoi.com. They have a really interesting series of blog posts. It's called Take 5 With. Well, they do interviews with people working in the industry. So there's one released today, right, Ali? Sorry, Zainab.
Yes.
So Amanda Kirby, I've not read it myself yet, so I don't know about Amanda, but I think it's every Monday, right?
Every Monday at 5 p.m.
Yep, okay.
I posted a link about the project and the Ally London tag if you're interested.
Okay, so this is Zainab from How Do I, who runs this kind of social media stuff that they do. It's really interesting. They've got loads of great interviews with people from the industry. I was fortunate enough to do one about a month ago. What I would say to you is if, like, I'm the kind of person that sometimes thinks I don't have anything new or interesting to say, and maybe I don't, but I can tell you one thing that happened was someone read my interview and then contacted me on Twitter and said, like, I've been quite inspired by what you said and I'd like to get into accessibility. And I think I'm going to have a conversation with him on Wednesday to see if there's anything I can do to help him, like, get into that. So that's all I would say is, you know, do an interview. You might inspire someone to take a bit of action or to change their career or something like that. If you want to use the Wi-Fi today, O2 Wi-Fi, I sent a message out earlier about how to get on that. You want to ask questions today? We've got two ways to do that. So we'll have Q&A at the end of the talks, and we have mics, handheld mics that we can bring round. But if you'd prefer to ask a question via text, you can do it on a website called Slido. So if you go to slido.com, on the home page you'll see a text box where you can enter a code. The code for today is 7893. So you just type that in, and it should take you to the room that we have set up for today. And you can ask questions, and then myself and Raf, my co-organizer, will see them, and we can ask them out for you at the end. So quick hands up exercise. Who's this first event tonight? Loads of people. It's probably about 2/3 of the room. So cool, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope it's the first of many. Then we're just going to try and get a feel for, like, the industries people work in. So who's working for a charity? Probably about 1/3 of the room. Government. Handful, like 10 or so. Corporates. Yeah, probably the rest-ish. Freelance. Handful, 10, okay. So quite a good mix of people. Who's working in design? We're going to put hands up for design and dev. Probably about 25 or so developers. About the same, maybe 20 or so. Content people. That's not me. And I'll put my hand up. Policy people. No one today. They're all out enjoying the sun. Any management type people? Handful? Yeah, okay. Good mix, okay. Anyone who's not seen the live captions before? Everyone, okay. So these are being produced by Orla at the front, who's a real person. So this is not software, it's being done by Orla. So thank you, Orla. Yeah, round of applause. Okay, so the agenda for tonight, we're running late because Orla broke the TV. So we had to change. So we had to change the TV. So we're running a bit late. Sorry. But the agenda for tonight, we've got two great speakers. What are you saying? Cheap Chinese TV. See, the computer wouldn't go rogue like that, would it? Maybe it would. I don't know. So yeah, two great speakers tonight. We have Steve Tyler from Leonard Cheshire. Steve has probably forgotten more about accessibility than all of us put together know, I think. So it's a real pleasure to have Steve join us tonight. And then Krissie Barrick from Scope. So they're going to be doing a joint presentation, I think, right? No-ish. A little bit? Unexplained, okay. Okay, they're both going to be speaking and giving us lots of useful information. So yeah, we're going to go till about 8 or so, maybe a little bit later, and then we'll have a break. The break might be a bit shorter today because of the problems we've had with the TV. But yeah, 2 great talks lined up. At the end, if you want to come and join us for a drink and a chat in the pub, we're going to go to a place called the Sir Christopher Hatton, which is about a 2-minute walk from here. So as we come out of the office, we're here, turn left, walk for about 30 seconds, cross the road, and the pub is just there. It's a fairly quiet pub, so we can have a conversation. Might even be able to stand outside today in the sun. So before we crack on the talks, just a quick thank you to all the sponsors and supporters. We'll do a round of applause at the end for them. So first of all, Sainsbury's, who provide the venue. So check them out, Sainsbury's on Twitter. It's one of the best meetup venues for us to use in London. Barclays, who have sponsored us for the whole year. So Barclays Access. They give us money to do the live captions and to have everything recorded and put onto YouTube, etc. So without that money, we wouldn't be as professional as we look. Orla, My Clear Text, again, amazing human-based live captioning service. So check them out. And then at the back, we have 3 people today. We're lucky to have all the guys from Meetup Video who are running the live stream for us, so putting that up onto YouTube, and all those captions are going onto YouTube in real time as well. Okay, final thing before we get started, if you need the toilet, they are back towards the lifts where you came in. Gents are on the left, ladies are on the right. Litter, please don't leave any litter in the venue. It's always spotless when we come in, so let's leave it the same, please. And then no planned fire drills, so if we hear an alarm, could be the real thing, so we need to leave the building. Fire exits back towards the lifts, and there's a staircase on the left and the right, so don't use the lifts, we just got the stairs to the main foyer where we came in. That's it. So I'm going to hand over to Krissie first, right? So we're going to do a laptop switch, and then it's all yours.
I'll leave you to do the laptop.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Pressure.
There's lots of wires back here, so I'm bound to do the wrong one.
You can hold this then,
Okay.
please.
Can everyone hear me? Is my mic on? Yeah. Okay, cool. So I have a bit of explaining to do because actually me and Steve planned to do a collaborative presentation, and we had quite a few hours booked into the diary to sort that out, but we ended up talking so much about accessibility, and Steve has got decades of experience in this area, which is absolutely fascinating. So we ended up going off track quite a bit. So we've worked it out. You're still going to hear from both of us, but it's not together on stage. I hope that's okay. We're also going to be hearing from designer, developer Harry later on, where we'll do a Q&A a bit about how to actually do inclusive design, and if you're new to accessibility, what that's like to get started with, because I think that's one of the questions that came up on the Meetup page, is kind of the actual hints and tips around that. So, hello. So I'm Krissie Barrick. I'm the head of digital influencing at Scope. I've been running a program which we're calling the Big Hack. And the idea with that program is that we work with the tech industry and with the disabled community to make sure that tech is much more fit for purpose for disabled people and usable. It's been a year in the making. It's been first and foremost a collaborative program, and as you'll see tonight, I really want to work with you guys in the room. I think it's really important for us that we really understand the behaviours and the needs of our audience who we intend to influence, and then we can make sure that we have the best offer for supporting you, to make sure that you're making really inclusive and accessible products. So, I'm not going to go on about me. I really do want to hear more from you guys. And I know you've just been asked to do surveys and Slido, but I'm going to ask you to do another thing, I'm afraid. So basically, in part of our research for the Big Hack, Scope has been developing personas. And this really helps us when we're basically building a digital support offer to people to help them practice inclusive design and accessibility. And basically, those personas really help us understand how that can work and how best to engage with people. So I'm going to run through the personas. And I reckon some of you in this room will identify quite closely with those. And some of you may not and think, oh, you've missed me out. But what we're really keen for you to do is tweet us with #BigHack. I'll give some more instructions as I do the personas, just telling us a little bit more about your experience. So, first persona we've got here is the Google Sprinter. You may hear the Google Sprinter saying, we are at the minimum standard for accessibility and people haven't seen any reason to go further. There are barriers to practicing inclusive design, to making their product accessible. Those might be perceived time and difficulty in designing for accessibility in a busy agency environment, knowledge in the team and resource to work on perceived extra workload, lack of senior buy-in, physical infrastructure that's part of the service that the team have no influence over, for example, ticket machines. So, right, getting your ticket is not all online. Often you have to go and collect it from the ticket. That could be inaccessible too. And things that they need are simple tools and patterns that fit into their current workflow to make it easier for them to consider inclusive design. And perhaps the business case to convince their boss that it's important. Does anyone think that sounds familiar? Yeah? You're going to see another one in a minute that's really familiar to you because I know they rang you. Okay. So what we're asking is what will influence this Google Sprinter? Like, they're not going into work going, accessibility, it's got to be something we do. Whereas actually that's how we want people to feel about accessibility. So what do you think are their barriers and needs to prioritising accessibility? Do you know anyone who is the Google Sprinter who you could put us in touch with? Please tweet with #BigHack, #Google Sprinter. And I'll put these up again at the end. Then there's the accessibility advocate, there's one sat in the front row there, who might say, I just say I'll do it. Sometimes it works to show videos of people struggling, but it often means me as a lone wolf working on the weekend to do this sort of thing. Barriers. Selling the business case of inclusive design and getting buy-in from senior stakeholders whose main focus is the bottom line. Difficulty in prototyping physical infrastructure. Needs. Guidance or principles from someone with a voice of authority, for example, GDS, scope. So it's not just me on my own selling the value of this approach. Also needs a community for designers to loop back in and share experience of what worked and what didn't on their projects, or perhaps knowledge of the community. So what will help the accessibility advocate? If you feel like you're one of them, what are your perceived barriers and needs to getting accessibility prioritised in the business that you're in? Tweet it with BigHack and A1Y advocate. Okay, developer. Hands up, who's developer? Yeah, I saw a few earlier. Okay, cool. So this might sound like you. I mean, yeah, it sounds a little bit mean actually, but I think for a lot of people, if they don't know about accessibility, it's fine that would sound like them. I don't want to waste lots of time making something really clunky for a small amount of people. My priority is to make it look really slick for the majority of people who will use it. Barriers. Probably don't know about accessibility, maybe don't know any disabled people, so don't really understand what the frustration looks like when they're trying to use a website and there's all kinds of barriers that have been put in their way that don't need to be there. Accessibility not a priority. If I can use it, anyone can. I think we're all guilty of this, designing in our own image. Needs to be respected as a developer and get recognition for my talent, to be seen as innovative and on board with best practice. Well, feel free to challenge this or add to it by tweeting us with #BigHack, #developer, with what you perceive as their barriers and needs. And the last one, the disability champion. I'm really happy to be a spokesperson. One of my passions is to make the world more accessible, and we need to speak up if we want change. Barriers, fluctuating energy levels, cost to participate, other life priorities. Needs, allow me to tell my story in my own way and respond with action. I've got allow me to tell me story there, but hey, give me enough warning so I can plan my travel. Ensure the venue is fully accessible and caters for my needs. So anyone who wants to go and practice inclusive design, it's really important to take note of this. And also, if you feel like this is you, then do please tweet us with more information or any challenges to that persona. Tweet with #BigHack, #disability champion. So that's on here, hashtag Google Sprinter, A1Y Advocate, Developer, Disability Champion, or you might be something else. So I know we've got a few content people here, and actually the perspective might be different if your job is focused on content. So in the break, plenty of time to hashtag this, and then at the end we'll have some time to feedback what we've heard. Again, this is really, really valuable to us in our work, so please just go ahead. What you have to say is really important. So now I'm going to hand you over to Steve Tyler, who has a fascinating talk which runs through his experience in this area.
Thanks.
I'll stand next to you.
So I'm hoping Chris is going to drive the slides. We've got a logo up, is that where we are?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks very much. Hi everybody. Older joke, but you were expecting Aerosmith. I know you were. It's okay, I'm not going to trash the theatre. Sadly, you've got me, and it's all about accessibility. Maybe a slightly odd take, but we'll get to that in a second. So, next slide. I've entitled this particular talk, Assistive Technology, Saviour or Threat? And part of the reason for doing that is that I'm one of these odd breed of people, there aren't many of us I think, who are paid to worry about the state of where things are, what things ought to be, and how do we get there. So next slide. I'm Steve Tyler. I suppose I've been around long enough to have engaged in lots and lots of things to do with disability, accessibility in the technology area. My background is clinical psychology, but I kind of got hijacked by technology and everything that it could deliver. And when I very first witnessed what it was like to log on to a server halfway across the world, I realized that this held so much possibility for people with disabilities. But there needed to be something in there that would ensure we got a fair crack of the whip in terms of access. I've worked on lots of things from the voice of Alexa, which I'll come back to that because it was part of the strategy to bring about accessibility in Amazon products, right through to delivery of TV into the UK and then on into the US, which was accessible. So the latest Samsung devices and a range of others, Panasonic, etc., are all testament to the teamwork that brought all of that about. Worked in the banking sector, payment systems, the retail area, had a fair amount to do with Sainsbury's and Barclays in my time. Autonomous vehicles, EPUB, and accessibility to the written word. Believe it or not, until very recently, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was lying in bed and did something which quite astonishing, really. I was listening to a podcast on my iPod, and they mentioned a book. And I, without really thinking about it, went on to the iBook store, searched for the book, found it, bought it, downloaded it, and there it was. And I realized that I'd never, ever been able to do that before. The traditional model would be that I would wait at a minimum for about 18 months before I could get a book that I could read. And of course, that depended on whether or not there was enough demand for it. And in fact, myself and a friend used to bet each other as we were beginning to change the publishing industry and working with publishers to bring about EPUB and what started off as DAISY, Digital Accessible Information System, which was a global movement. We didn't know that it would be EPUB then, but we knew what needed to happen. And we used to test each other, and I used to say really weird things to Richard, as we were walking along a random road somewhere in a random place across the world. And I'd say things like, okay, so I would like to read The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. I don't mind how you get hold of it, but it has to be in a format I can read. Go. And we would time how long it would take before you could get such a thing. Next slide. So what I want to talk to you about, this is about Leonard Cheshire, and I just want to introduce the organisation just a little bit, just so you know who I'm working for today, but just a little bit of an intro as well to what I'm about to talk about, which is the broad nature of where we are today with technology, the importance of paying attention to where we are, because we can be wrong-footed very quickly. What about accessibility, and where is it? And what impact, what do we need to be paying attention to? And it seems to me that actually a lot of what we need to be paying attention to is ourselves and our own behaviours, rather than the technology, although the technology plays an enormously important part because it's a big driver of change. Leonard Cheshire, our broad mantra is that we want to bring about a situation where, bring about a world where people can live, learn and work in the manner they choose. We run 150 services across the country, from living accommodation through to supporting people through education and getting a degree through university, right through to getting a job. So we run apprenticeship schemes of all kinds. We're a pan-disability organisation in the biggest sense you can imagine. We touch around 40,000 people's lives a year. There are about 4,000 people that live in our residences, and those people range from people who are virtually non-communicative or entirely non-communicative, and it's not clear whether they are there or not in any meaningful sense, and I'll come back to that too, right through to people who are pretty much okay and live a pretty ordinary life, except when the chips are down, they really are down. So they might have a muscle spasm problem or a musculoskeletal problem, which means that when they collapse, they need immediate assistance now. But for 99.5% of the time, you wouldn't even know. Next slide. So technology today, well, you don't need me to tell you this, but it's perhaps worth reminding us of what technology has done to us today. But we've changed our expectations of life and of everything we do, really. The increase in change and the pace of change is vast. We live in a world where Google is a verb. We live in a world where online entertainment means that we want instant gratification. If it doesn't work immediately, we move off the website. Amazon has completely revolutionized the shopping experience and has set a benchmark around what online shopping is. And the connected home has basically merged with reality. We don't really think of things anymore as separate from each other as we might have done 4 or 5 years ago. Some things used to be very much in the online universe, some things very much not. And now it's not quite clear where the blurring begins and ends. Banking, citizenship, transactional systems of all kinds have begun to be optimized online. And they're hugely important elements to everything we do and the way we operate as a nation, as a society. Next slide. And the infrastructure. So we've got the connected environment, we've got the hardware that hosts it, we've got the software that drives it, and they're becoming very complex, very interrelated, with a deal of mutual reliance. And we've seen some of that, where intermittently the net goes down. we were promised not long ago that that could never happen. We were told that this was an impossibility because of the way the internet was constructed. As it turns out, that was an outright lie, and it was a marketing ploy. The product we carry around in our pocket, it's maybe worth remembering, especially given where we are 50 years on, has more power in it than the entirety of NASA had at its disposal around technical capacity. AI, machine learning, big data, and data analytics, they're the order of the day. But they're buzzwords, and a lot of people don't really understand what they mean. But suffice to say that they are operating in all kinds of environments, from the energy we use without even thinking, and the supply of that, to logistics that controls how how anybody that delivers anything online delivers. And there's a continual morphing and changing of business cases, business models, and the biggest companies can rise or fall without even realizing what's gone on. And good examples, I've used Nokia here. You know, Nokia started off life, amongst other things, in the paper industry. And when their directors sat round a table thinking, you know, the printed word, the environmental effects of using trees to print, maybe there's a new way of doing it now in the oncoming connected universe. And they had a good old discussion and a brainstorming and lots of flip charts, and they came up with this notion that you could carry something about in your pocket that would revolutionize the way we did everything. It wouldn't just be a communication aid, it would change the environment you lived and worked in. It would be your go-to thing that operated the world around you. And they took this idea to a very large company which will remain nameless in London and said, you know, what do you think of it? This is a pretty damn good idea, isn't it? But we need you to do due diligence on it and tell us what you think. And they came back after lots of research about 9 months down the track and said, yeah, all very interesting, guys, but you know, you're really better off doing something else. I mean, our estimate is that you would probably sell about 150,000 units globally. So frankly, you ought to do something else. Anyway, they tore up that report, carried on, and became the biggest global mover in the mobile market. And those of you who are around long enough to remember, it was Nokia and Ericsson. And now look, Nokia disappeared very, very quickly. Kodak, it was a household name. They made the mistake of thinking that digital really wasn't going to happen. It was all a flash in the pan, and people would just get with the program, and photographs would always be hugely important in a physical form. Look at Toys R Us. The high street has been affected in ways we never envisaged. And just a thought, if people had been listening more to the accessibility community in the days when Amazon was still a very small organization focused on delivering books and CDs, then we might not be having quite the same conversations around the demise of the high street. I mean, it may be fine. We may be all happy with the demise of the high street. But the point is, we've got no choice anymore because it's happening. Government didn't pay attention around what was actually going on and couldn't foresee where that was going. Next slide. I just want to talk briefly about the big ethical, cultural, moral impacts that we're all subject to in some of the stuff that's going on today, and in particular is important to people with disabilities. Accessibility is an obvious issue. Accessibility is increasingly tricky, though, It's very difficult to define what accessibility is, and you have to be deeply immersed in it really to understand what it is. And in any case, our market research shows that people with disabilities quite often don't really understand what we're on about when we talk about accessibility. In fact, some of the latest findings would say we're not really interested in accessibility. What we're interested in is something that I can use. And for some people, accessibility means something big and probably horrible that they don't want in their house, probably coloured orange and black. Reliability and longevity of a solution, well, you know, that doesn't happen very often these days. Software comes and goes. There is a continual updating process across all platforms. Apps can come and go, depending on when people get bored or there's not money in it or they just decide they don't want to do it anymore. Data and control and the rights of the individual. And what about those individuals who have rights? It's just that they can't express them, or they require people to support them in the expression of them. Freedoms and engagement. The power of social media and the impact of social media and new social platforms on the way we engage socially with each other. Interestingly, we've done a piece of work recently where we've noticed quite a horrible trend where employers do a trawl around social media to try and deduce whether or not people have a disability. And if they have, they're screened out of the employment process before they even get there. Next slide. So this is a dangerous slide. What's coming? So you're either mad or deluded or something to try to predict some of this stuff. So I've tried to stick to the areas that I'm most confident about and then maybe go a bit left field on you at the end. So 5G connectivity, well, what does that mean? We're told faster, better, more slick connectivity. In fact, faster than cable in some cases. I think we ought to watch that one a little bit because we've still not quite got the mobile network we need of today. And to get 5G, we need blanket coverage of enormous proportions. So what I suspect will happen is urban communities will get high speed, and even within urban communities, very central ones will get very high speed, not so much for a while for the rural communities, but it's a nice dream, and it will eventually happen. I suspect it will take longer than we imagine. More elaborate home automation and control, and already we're beginning to see our homes becoming monitored, cameraed, wired for sound, and you know, alerts that come at you all the time. I get continual alerts about my Nest security system and who's coming and going, and whether or not the house is safe or otherwise. But those things are set to increase. More and more products becoming connected and feeding data, and that data being interpreted by wider solutions. 3D printing. 3D printing, I think, is enormous around personalization, and potentially is a massive disruptor of traditional manufacturing models. You know, we've seen it in the publishing industry where you might not realize, but as part of the work we did around EPUB and the broader push around electronic publishing, you know, if you order a book today from Amazon in print, chances are it was produced especially for you in Milton Keynes by a company called Lightning Source, bagged up and sent to you as if it's a book off the shelf. Actually, it was produced especially for you. And those models, I believe, will begin to find their way into everyday manufacturing. And in theory, it will give us optimal design for the kind of uses that we might need. Robotics and physical support systems. We can already see that car manufacturers are beginning to rechristen themselves as mobility providers rather than car manufacturers. And, you know, there's a lot of money and energy being put in by people like Toyota and so on, who have set up challenges to bring on the new types of vehicles that are emerging. Autonomous vehicles and traditional transport infrastructure massively changing. So imagine what if, when we see the autonomous vehicle really take off, and the step changes that will occur over the coming few years to bring that about. What does that mean for some of the wider transport infrastructure? You won't need train stations or bus stations on quite the scale they are today, because it will be an on-demand set of solutions. What does that do to the property prices, for example, that currently pride themselves on being connected hubs? There will be very major changes that we've not really been paying attention to. Even more seamless payment and transactional infrastructures. And I mean, you know, we're already seeing those in so many ways. The latest, I guess, with contactless, but now there's, you know, things like Apple Pay and all the Android ecosystem, Samsung Pay. And then there's this kind of morphing that's beginning to happen with the advent of the Apple credit card, which, yes, is a physical product, but it also relies on a non-physical product. Diagnosis, genetics, and bioengineering, and along with the coming together of biological systems and chipsets, and the advances that that will bring in prosthetics for people with disabilities, and that blending of the biological world and the electronic world. So a bit of left field for you. A published proposition is that by 2030 there will be brain-to-cloud direct interface. Indeed, Elon Musk is working on a prototype of exactly that now. And the side benefit is a better brain, a better, faster brain, where you don't even have to think about whether or not you thought of the solution, because you'll be very neatly blended in with the ecosystem that is the cloud. Next slide. So what about assistive technology? What's all that about? Well, definitions are very blurry about assistive technology, and, you know, I have been working in this field for a very long time and have been a massive advocate of where we are today, which is that Apple and Microsoft and Google and big manufacturing entities like Samsung are delivering accessibility in spades. And the downside of that, if there is one, is that those accessibility products that are coming on the market, they solve challenges for those who are able to get their heads around them or their physical selves around them. And there are connectivity options for some of these things where, you know, for example, Windows has made it possible, Windows infrastructure has made it possible for very tight integration between a new kind of breed of product which takes advantage of the Windows ecosystem but completely amends the interface. So a simple example is a thing called My Guide, which is a homegrown product in the UK, little company called Dolphin, who've basically made a very, very simple version of Windows for people that are not very technically able or technically literate. Or another example, Grid 3, a complete revolution in communications capability for those people that can't communicate traditionally. This device runs on Windows, but it looks absolutely nothing like Windows. Instead, it can be completely personalized and will interact with virtually any device that's available for any potential physical or cognitive thing. So it responds to eye movement, and if that's all you can move, you can control the computer system. You can do everything from simple tasks like turn the TV over, turn the lights on or off, decide who to let into your house, through to a PowerPoint presentation. But accessibility providers are amalgamating. So those specialist businesses who existed are really finding it difficult to survive. So they're buying each other out and becoming more major players and less specialized. And I think the market is becoming quite confusing. But the end result is that although there is lots of resource and expense around the industry available to entities like Apple, for example, they're finding it difficult to penetrate users' consciousness around accessibility. People are still quite confused about the difference between an accessible product and now what is no longer an accessible product but an everyday widget. You know, so in the case of Apple, people get confused when you talk about voiceover for blind people and a screen reader that speaks to you. They say, oh yeah, oh you mean Siri, don't you? No, but it's just too confusing and people don't really pay much attention. And right at the other end of the spectrum, where people need it most, actually we're seeing a real dip in development and innovation. So those people that I talked about right at the beginning, those people with the more serious disability, more major cognitive impairments, more significant communication problems, they're beginning to be left out in the cold. It's a traditional idea from marketing gurus around the world, even now, that disability is difficult. It's just a difficult area to me. It's too complicated. There are too many different types of it. And boy, they're not wrong. I mean, there are several thousand conditions that are broadly categorized as blindness. When you start merging blindness with autism, that becomes a very complex situation. When you start talking about the variations in learning disability and physical disability, it is a complicated area. And we don't help as a disability community. I'll come back to that. So what strategies, next slide, sorry. What strategies work to bring about mainstream development? And I've spent, I suppose, as it turns out, most of my life, I didn't realize, I mean, I didn't set out to do that, but it seemed to me that it was hugely important to focus on how far could we push mainstream accessibility, or the mainstreaming of accessibility, and then what do we do with the rest of the world? What do we do with the area that's left where mainstream will not go there because it's just too complicated? And on the slide I've given examples of the kind of thing we've done, whether it's working with accessibility to the published word, right through to TV and Amazon accessibility. And the kind of techniques include understanding the business drivers, hugely important, obvious, but hugely important. I think the disability sector wasn't very keen on understanding business drivers, almost an alien concept really, but without understanding the business drivers and how decisions were made in mainstream companies, and not just that, but the infrastructure that drove them. So for example, when we were working on TV, it became very clear that, you know, a lot of the big companies were really brands. Actually, the guys that really drove what the technology was were these very mysterious organisations known as middleware companies. And these are the guys that hold all the cards, as it turns out. They're the guys who decree what can go in boxes and what can work together, at what price point. And so, you know, brands will approach these middleware guys and say, right, well, we want something to retail at £499. This is what we want in the box. These are the types of products. This is the thing that we want it to look like. And these are the capabilities of it. What can you do? And then there's a barter and a negotiation. And eventually they kind of get most of what they want or some of what they want, depending on how ridiculous the ask was. The business case development being linking accessibility to mainstream success. So a really good example of that is search optimization that brings accessibility to the top of any search. So if you do a search on Google, search optimization is hugely important. But to do search optimization nicely, and the best of search optimization can be done by making sure, as it turns out, that your website is accessible, because it relies on searchable data. It relies on data being optimized to be found and linked, and then, and obviously what Google is trying to do is find you the closest term that you're looking for. But there are lots and lots of other examples. Just step back for a second. In the disability sector, you know, we're steeped in examples of this kind, where, you know, the typewriter was built by an Italian engineer for his blind girlfriend who got fed up with dictating love letters to him to friends. So he made her a device that she could write her own love letters. The second reason given for the adoption of the gramophone in the patents was talking books for the blind. The optical character recognition system was developed by a guy called Ray Kurzweil, who's still alive and well today. And I remember the very first one. It was a scanner, or OCR system, which today sits on a desktop for 50 quid, then cost 47 grand and was about the size of a fridge. It was about 1982. Standards development, hugely important, because to make things work, you need to engage with the standards guys and make it make sense, make what you're suggesting make sense. Sometimes regulation, sometimes global decision making. I mean, essentially, if you want to influence Google and Microsoft and Apple and Samsung, you've got to go to the US or Korea or wherever they live. That's where the decisions are taken, and those decisions are far-reaching and global. And a focus on human beings that make what corporates are. I mean, we think of companies as, and we refer to them as corporates, bodies of people. Actually, they're made up of people like me and you. And as it turns out, surprise, surprise, those people at most senior level who have been touched by disability or touched by an illness, they quite often get it. And if they get it, as it turns out, the rest of the company gets it too. We've worked on things like structured negotiation, new ways of talking to businesses. It's a kind of legalistic way of dealing with things, but it means that we all know where we are. There was a time when everyone talked about corporate social responsibility, and that is becoming more important again, as it happens, as a result of the environmental imperative and so on. And just as a sideline, I think we're beginning to win the day when employers and service providers think and talk about people with disabilities in exactly the same way they think and talk about the importance of the environment or the importance they have around the importance on race relations or the gender gap. And then ultimately, of course, there's court action. It's a bit silly in the UK, just out of interest. It seems to me that, you know, take Barclays, take our sponsors, take Sainsbury's. I mean, If Sainsbury's doesn't comply with disability legislation such that it is, as a service provider, okay, it can get into trouble. But actually, there's a lot that Sainsbury's simply can't do anything about, because as the service and delivery agency, there is a focus on the service provider, but yet it sells manufactured products. Well, they're not touched by legislation around accessibility. So despite how much you want to hit Sainsbury's over the head for not delivering you an accessible product, it's actually not a great deal it can do. Next slide.
About 5 minutes.
So innovating specialist technology, I just think we need to take more control in determining our futures. And the organisations that represent us need to step up to the challenge. We need to make it less confusing for business. We need to collaborate with each other, and I've got endless examples of where collaboration really works. We're joining forces with a single focus. You know, we recently worked on I'm using a note taker here, which is a little braille display-based thing. Pins that move up and down that form braille, for those that don't know. A very simple device, complex because of the braille bit, but you know, it's $3.5 grand for 18 characters of braille. That's a bit like, you know, imagine covering up your screen and having a little slot with a window with 18 letters that you move about the screen. That's what I'm using here. Now, £3,500 is a lot, but we know that it's hugely important as a concept for literacy development and holding down a job, frankly. So we set about changing the world around bringing down the costs. There were 67 projects, none of whom were talking to each other, all working on the same thing and all spending vast amounts of money. What we did was brought a global alliance together to crack the problem. Clearly identifying need and attracting solution providers and researchers. Universities are great. We haven't got a single portal where people can go to find out what the challenges really are. And market disruption, hugely important. Open source is a well understood concept in software land, but you know, open design is coming to hardware. Hackathons and hacks, hugely important. The new mechanisms for helping us prove concepts and get stuff onto the market. And of course, hugely important, user engagement and making the sector more attractive. There's £250 billion of expenditure to be had in the 14.4 million people that live with disabilities in the UK. That is not a niche market. Next slide. So just a very quick thing here. Current funding models, I mean, you know, broadly, there is access to work, which is a funding mechanism for people in employment who have disabilities. There's a similar thing for students. There's a specialist entity around National Health Service. When they all work, they're fantastic. But a lot of the time they don't work. The assessments that are made are incorrect, and people lose out on all kinds of things. We need to change all of that to become much more person-centred. Next slide. We're currently doing 2 pieces of work which I don't have an enormous amount of time to tell you about at Leonard Cheshire, but what they focus on are new ways of bringing about accessibility and effectively a new world for people living in their own homes and in ours. Next slide. Predictive health analytics is becoming a hugely important area. We're working with a company called MySense that sets out to monitor your home unobtrusively and provide, through artificial intelligence, predictive information about things that are likely to happen to you based on the signs and symptoms that it's seeing. And then next slide. And we're also adopting a second project centred around a person-centred approach. So this is about putting people right at the centre of what we're doing, rather than categorising them into different types of disabilities, thinking about them as are they in employment, are they in education, well, these are the funding mechanisms you need to go through. Instead, thinking more about them as individuals with a plan, individuals that if only they even knew what the options were, they might just choose to take some of the ones that are on offer. A lot of the time they don't even know what's on offer and they're not available, even if they did know. Next slide. I think there needs to be cultural change. So although technology is influencing culture big style, more than, and as I mentioned earlier, this is set to continue at a faster and faster pace. You know, we live in a society that currently doesn't easily accept diversity and difference. And sometimes technology is being used against that idea. We did a survey recently of managers who, bear in mind who we are, we're a disability organisation, it says it on the tin, Leonard Cheshire Disability. 22% of managers, recruiting managers, said we would not recruit a person with a disability. But the stats are bleaker when you look at what actually is going on. 73% of people that involuntarily lose their job do so because of a long-term health condition or an acquired disability. We're in 2019, we're in the 5th strongest economy on the planet, so we're led to believe. What's all that about? So we need to change the culture, and we need to change the way we think about it. And some organisations are doing that in spades, changing the way they think about diversity, because actually, if you change the way you think about diversity and employ people with diversity that actually reflect the society we live in, you've got half a chance of delivering product that they can use as well. Next slide. What are we doing about it? Well, we're doing all sorts of things that I mentioned before. We're running apprenticeship schemes. We're arguing for new methods around funding. We're rethinking benefits, and we want to move to a place where diversity is seen as business critical and not something that you'd prefer not to do. Next slide. So what do blind people want to read? What does a wheelchair user want to do? And the answer to that is whatever everyone else does. There's no difference. And we still, too many times, get asked those questions in the disability community. But we need to inform people, we need to inform society and culture in new ways and use new methods for doing that, including some of the new social media and some of the technology at our disposal. We need to unify our messaging much more. We need to become much more savvy around shared agendas and shared communities. And rather than being subject to the winds of change, we need to begin to control where they're going. Last slide, thank you. And you can contact me at steve.tyler at leonardcheshire.org. And I keep forgetting it doesn't have a UK at the end, so don't do that. Cheers. Robin?
Questions?
Maybe got time for one question, I think.
One question?
Anyone has one?
Make it a bruiser. Why not? I'll ask you a question.
Okay, nothing on the website, so go ahead.
Did what I said make sense? Does it resonate with you guys? Well, that's good enough for me.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much. Some really insightful things for us all to think about there. Thank you. It's 15 minutes, all right, all?
Yeah.
20?
15 's fine.
15? Okay. So if we come back at 8:30, there should be some drinks, maybe a little bit of pizza left, and then we've got Steve, and totally forgot to introduce you, Harry. No, it's not, it's terrible. Clear, honest design as well, so yeah. 8:30, thanks very much. I apologise, I completely forgot to mention Harry Hurd as well from Clear Honest Design. I'm going to big Krissie up a little bit. I worked with Krissie's uncle at RNIB, and about a year ago he messaged me and he said, my niece is doing some stuff in accessibility, can I introduce you to her? And he kind of made it sound like she'd just come out of school and she didn't really know anything, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's have a chat. But yeah, Krissie's done some amazing things in her career, and I think what we're going to hear about right now is, I'm really excited about it. So, over to you guys.
Thanks.
Okay.
I feel a bit like I've made it because I look like I'm hosting a talk show. It's stuck on me. Okay, is that better? Okay. I won't repeat what I just said. So I'm here with Harry Hurd. Harry and Harry's organisation, Clear Honest Design, have been working with us at Scope for about 6 months. And someone put on the meetup about kind of how to do accessibility, and actually some kind of, maybe I'm inspired to do it, but then how do I start with inclusive design and making a product accessible? So we're going to do a bit of a Q&A, and hopefully Harry will answer some of those questions and give you some helpful information for you to go and take into your own work. It sounded very interesting. Oh, what's the word? It sounded great when I said this to Harry earlier, but I don't have it in the same context now. But I guess for me, a big part of what we're doing in the Big Hack is making accessibility accessible. Like something that we found is that it can feel like a concept that's a bit over there, and actually people tend to be kind, and they want to make their product accessible. They want to know that disabled people can use it, but actually the challenges is then going about and doing that. So hopefully that's what the Big Hack will achieve for product teams and businesses. So, too many slides, right. So, I'm going to ask Harry some questions, and then I'd love for you guys to ask him any questions you might have. So, as a start, what's inclusive design, Harry?
Oh, thanks, Krissie, for the setup. I didn't know what was coming. So, a little bit of context is, so we've been working on building the products and the websites for the Big Hack and doing all the thinking around it. And in no way would I ever claim to be an accessibility expert. Before getting involved with Krissie and the Big Hack, a lot of the websites we built now don't meet the same standards of inclusive design that I would hold myself accountable to going forward. And for me, inclusive design is entirely consistent with the broad principles of design generally. How can you make products and services that are joyous and work for as many people as possible and make their lives as easy as possible? The concept of design is not designing for yourself, it's finding a problem for other people and then solving it. And so, for me, inclusive design is just an extension of being a good designer or developer or whatever you do, and making it as amazing and as frictionless an experience for as wide an audience as possible. Because as someone who makes things, ultimately, no one wants to make something that makes someone's life harder or is difficult or is frustrating. And so inclusive design just means widening the field of empathy and applying it to people who may not be like you or may not be in your situation at that time, and just making it as good as possible.
So I'd be interested, did you always have that approach as a designer, or is it more recent since you've been working with Scope? So
we, as an agency, we only work with people who do good in the world and want to make the world a better place. And so we had the broad concept of empathy. A lot of the clients we were working with, the people they were reaching had very different experiences that we may not have had. And another of the qualities in any good designer or agency or team ultimately I think is humility as well, to accept that you might not know everything, but then taking the time and the effort to understand it. That's what fundamentally makes designers worthwhile. It's not the technical skill, it's not the ability necessarily to implement it, it's the ability to ask the right questions, to understand people's experiences which aren't your own. And so we had areas of it, even so around accessibility. So I've long thought about colour and contrast, and making sure that everything can be has as high a contrast as possible for people with low vision, and other areas broadly where principles of good design, or especially in web development, say user experience. What's great for general usability for everyone also happens to be really good for accessibility for the disabled community. So within UX, everyone says that you should try and reduce the number of fields in a form as much as possible, because it's a pain. And if you can take 20 seconds off someone's experience of filling out a form, that's great. But then if you widen that out to the disabled community, what could be 20 seconds to the designer filling it out, or the developer, could be 2 minutes or 10 minutes to someone who takes longer to fill out forms. So the improvements and advancements that you have there benefit everyone, regardless of their ability.
Cool. So in the Big Hack, we talk about inclusive design as what we want people to kind of be learning about and engage with. And part of that is accessibility. But I think the two concepts really overlap and can be used to mean the same thing. So just from your perspective, how do inclusive design and accessibility differ?
So, as you say, obviously people can use them interchangeably, and a lot of the time they mean the same thing. But to me, accessibility is a kind of after the fact bit. You design something for an audience that you imagine, and then at the end of it you go, but how can I make sure that everyone can use it? And that's, to me, you're missing a step if you're doing that. The trick is to think right from the beginning, how can I design this in its most basic conception so that it works for absolutely everyone and is a joy? And the beauty of design and development is designing and developing with constraints, right? It's seeing a challenge and then finding the best way to combat that. How can you make the most beautiful design? How can you make the most usable product, the most effective thing, given these constraints? And I think too often from a design community and development community, including myself historically, I've looked past what can be sometimes seen as more of a challenge of designing for a wider range of people. And as a consequence, I've made something that's not as good, because even if ultimately the solution, which I found from doing the Big Hack projects, isn't that tough, even just that process of asking yourself to think wider in that early stage means that you'll make something that's better for everyone, regardless of their ability.
Cool. Just to add some context to that, Harry's initial task with us was to design a reporting tool, which I'll have a link to it at the end, but basically this tool is something that people can use to report when they have an inaccessible or non-inclusive online experience, which could also span to an offline experience. So for example, booking an Uber and then you go to get in the Uber and that's completely inaccessible. So this tool really helps us gather a lot of data and stories about what the digital world is like for disabled people, and that's how we're really kind of gearing where we take this program and what we're trying to change with it. So Harry designed this inclusively. It was a design challenge. It was relatively new. What I think is really interesting and could be an interesting point for the audience is that you have since gone back to websites you've designed for previous clients and made them accessible where they weren't. And actually I think for a lot of people in this audience, they're probably working with particularly charity websites is stuff that's been around for a really long time, and there's probably got loads and loads of pages and the sitemap's like chaos. So what would your advice be in terms of going back to things and then making them accessible?
So that's what we're doing, and sometimes I'm sure lots of people, especially developers here, if you open an old website independently of accessibility, you look at it and go, oh my God, I cannot believe I built this. This is awful. Whose code is this? Then you realise it's yours as you spot traits on it. But I think the main thing from our perspective when we were doing this is it can be daunting with the idea that you have to do it all, perfectly and in one go, and then because of that, you end up not doing any of it. And ultimately, small steps get you closer to the end goal, and once you start it, you find that you become really engaged in it and you want to, do everything as best as you can. So we've got loads of websites, that are out there that now if I was building them, I'd build them to a higher standard. And I'm not, chastising myself and staying up till 5 o'clock in the morning every night, desperate to make it perfect. I'm just working through them, as I can, making them as accessible as possible. And, crucial from my perspective in that, it's not something that, it's not a marketing opportunity, it's not a way to, get in contact with old clients. It's just fundamentally the right thing to do, because I have the ability and the skills to do that because I've become more aware and hopefully through this whole process become slightly more empathetic. And so now I know what the impacts are of not doing it. And so by going back through the site, even if they're the people who own the sites never knew it was an issue in the first place and had never thought of it, it could be affecting people who really need their services, especially in the charity world and non-profit and people trying to make a difference. The idea that it simultaneously can exclude people is something that I think everyone, both from within those charities or businesses, and more importantly from the people who should have the pride and responsibility for having built those products, should want them to be as accessible and open and inclusive as they can be.
Cool. It's like he's been reborn as an A1Y advocate.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience has any questions for Harry or me.
On that last point of going back and reworking clients' websites, presume you did that with their permission, you didn't just change them and stuff?
No. Yeah, I let them know. I asked them first. I did say, hey, I'm really sorry, but what we did before doesn't meet our new standards. Okay. Would you mind very much if I fix them? And so far they've all said yes, which is lovely.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. Be bad to say no.
Well, we have a question.
Ooh.
Krissie, what is Scope's The Big Hack?
I did say before this second half, I haven't really explained what Scope is or The Big Hack, so sorry about that. So basically, Scope is a campaigning organisation, fairly similar to Leonard Cheshire but UK focused, and Leonard Cheshire runs services. We work quite closely with government in terms of campaigning and getting legislation changed. We also work closely with businesses to make sure that they have the best kind of practice in employing disabled people. And now we have another strategic theme, which is digital. And we also work in the area of financial security for disabled people and best start in life for young disabled children, families of disabled children. The digital bit, as I said, began about a year ago. And basically, The Big Hack seeks to work with the tech community, with businesses and with disabled people to bridge gaps that exist in between. We're doing this, I'm a service designer, previously was a service designer, so doing this in a really user-centered way. The idea is that we have identified the people that we need to influence, and then we really want to get to know them and understand what will influence them. So instead of telling them, they should practice inclusive design and create accessible products. We hope to inspire them, and in doing that, we're building a resource hub, and we're really opening that out to the design community. I hate this comparison, but we're calling it the BuzzFeed for inclusive design, but I can't think of any other way of describing it. We also have our reporting tool, so what that does is it helps us find out where the key barriers are in the digital world that disabled people are experiencing, and we can really tell a story with that, so we can actually go to businesses and say, these are people's experiences on your website, actually, and this is the impact of it. And out of that, we're going to make a film, and that will be ready for November when we fully launch the big hack, and the film will show like a day in the life of people experiencing different barriers to tech, and actually it will show you how the time and money tots up when you're experiencing those barriers throughout your life. I mean, not booking a flight through price comparison websites means that you probably have to phone up and spend a heck of a lot more on booking your flight, and that's just like one tiny example. We're also working with open inclusion. I think Tom's here somewhere. Oh, there he is. Hi, Tom. So we're working with open inclusion, and we are building, this is really long, sorry, but we're building the business case for inclusive design. So the idea is that we work with product teams, but we can also work with senior people in businesses and organisations to demonstrate that there's real commercial and ethical value in practicing inclusive design. And that business case is going to be super jazzy because Tom is a genius. And basically we're looking at combining different data sets to look at the spending patterns between disabled and non-disabled people in different industries. And then we're doing a lot of qualitative work to understand why that is, so we can ultimately demonstrate to people who are working in specific industries the opportunity that they're missing out on by not practicing inclusive design. If that wasn't very eloquent and didn't make sense, then I will be hanging around afterwards so I can explain it. Or actually, no, ask Tom, because he can probably explain it much better. But yeah, that's the big hack, and hopefully it will be going across many years and evolving in many forms.
And just to add to it, the approach the whole way is that when you go on and you look at it, if you've got suggestions or ideas of how it can be improved, or you've got skills that you can contribute or anything, we want to hear all of it. We're not sensitive. If you say that's rubbish, it can be done better, then tell us, and we want to make it as impactful and effective as possible.
Yeah, just be brutally honest.
Yeah.
That's the way best products or services or programs occur. Brutal honesty.
Yeah.
Tear us down. I think you have a question.
Yeah, it was just to ask about the reporting tool that you mentioned. I don't know if you were going to talk about that anyway, but it sounded really interesting, and wanted to know kind of what that process looked like and how you, if at all, managed to make it inclusive in terms of the way you actually designed it.
Yeah, so it was quite a challenge, because to build a kind of essentially like a feedback tool, like a survey, that was both really engaging and hopefully a bit more fun than just a dry, kind of standard tick box affair. But to make it as inclusive as it possibly could be, it was a massive learning curve for us, and it basically involved us. So we designed it, we ran workshops with different user groups with kind of pan disabilities to see what their inputs were and how they would use this thing, and what their feedback was. And then actually, so in the designing process, that came into it, and trying to be as kind of open as possible, of thinking, right, with someone with a really short amount of time, how can you do what can be quite a complex form as simply as they possibly can. And then from the technological side of developing it, it's the first time that I've ever navigated more than just kind of like a standard website using, say, just VoiceOver or screen readers. And so learning how to use them and seeing the pitfalls of the way that I had designed and developed things previously, and then iterating and improving on it. Luckily, the Scope kind of accessibility review team is amazing. So they told me the errors that I'd made, which I could then learn from and iterate on. And again, beyond that, it's not just the technological side or the visual design or the UX. Then you get to, content of wording, and that has to be accessible. And again, that, like I was saying earlier, in terms of improving the skill set generally, coming from the accessible viewpoint, it's amazing where the focus is on how can you write in a way that absolutely everyone can understand, and you're not using any jargon, you're not using flowery language, you're not, doing all that kind of stuff. And it's amazing, and it's made me better already, and I know that I've got a long way to go, and to learn and to continually improve. But that focus of thinking about how can you design for all makes it better for everyone. And so the tool, we're just about to, so we've had version 1 out there, and we're going to be going to version 2 relatively soon, learning from our experiences on the first version of it. But yeah, it was great. It was more than anything, it was fun to do. It was that bit I said before of designing with constraints is the fun bit. That's the bit where you get a challenge and you go, okay, how can I do this? How can I still make it look, in my mind, beautiful and be as accessible as it possibly can be? So hopefully, well, we'll wait for version 2.
I always don't want anyone to look at it before version 2. It's always the thing where you have a product and you're like, yeah, this is amazing. And then you see how people are using it, and then you redesign it, and you're like, no, this is amazing. And you're like, no one look at the old one, the new one's coming.
And then version 3 will come.
Oh my God, it'll just blow all our minds.
No, but so the general idea of it is, so our initial instinct was that we wanted to get as much quantitative data as we could, because obviously it's online, it can go to everyone. And then through people using the first version, we realised that actually some of the really powerful outputs that we got from it was the qualitative side of hearing people's stories who might not necessarily have answered a different questionnaire or gone to a user research group, but we were hearing these stories that were really impactful. And so what we've done is in the second version is say, okay, well, how can we set that up as well so that we're getting more of those really impactful stories, which, okay, we might not have all of the quantitative side and in those particular questions, but we're still getting stories that need to be heard.
Thank you.
Hello. I had a question, especially being so new in terms of your evolution and progression in the space of inclusive design and development. What sorts of tools do you use in terms of your daily work, either from a design or development perspective? Nothing beats great user testing and user research and talking to subject matter experts, but they're not normally sitting in a huddle right next to you waiting to be asked the question. Yeah. There's lots of design and development work that's happening in between. So what sorts of tools are your daily drivers?
In terms of inclusive design?
In terms of inclusive design and development.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a really good question. So on its like the baseline, there's the kind of accessibility review tools. So like in Chrome, they've got the audits for accessibility, Wave from WebAIM. There's things like that where you can get the kind of the base level, and often, especially going through other sites, those can be a good jumping off point, to have those discussions. Internally within our agency, because we've all talked a lot about this and grappled with the idea of, okay, what does it mean to design inclusively? What don't we know from our experiences, and what are we missing? We've read a lot of blogs from people both within the disabled community talking about their experiences of using websites and pulling out patterns and saying, okay, do we recognise any of that within our own sites?
I'm just going to chime in here. I think Harry was really lucky in the sense that he was working with Scope. So he did already have a community of disabled people to access, and I totally accept that that's a real challenge for other designers and developers. So it's a massive issue and barrier that we know of is actually just lack of access to disabled people. So your attention might be there, but co-design might feel something that's very far away. And I I don't have an answer for that, like, especially with safeguarding stuff. So, I mean, what I would say is when I was, my previous life built an app for women with breast cancer, and the challenge really was just not being able to find women with breast cancer because it wasn't in my network, and I was in a breast cancer charity, but there were all kinds of processes, and I was like, I just want to chat with them, like, just for a starting point. I want to get this done now. Well, in the end, we phoned up someone's grandma with permission, and she had had breast cancer and was in a breast cancer group. And that way we could talk to loads of people with breast cancer. And I think with health conditions and with disability, there are lots of groups that it probably would just take a Google to find out about a certain DPO who you can chat with, that's Disabled People's Organisation, and they would be so willing to share. So if you're designing for deaf and hard of hearing, Deaf Unity is one, for example, who are literally just on the other end of the phone and absolutely happy to share and test things. So I think it's a little bit of motivation to do your own research, but get in touch with DPOs, and without a doubt you'll have people who are happy to share their learning. Or come to Scope, and we can also help you out, but we do charge.
Hi, my question is around, the compliance laws are under AA and AAA, and then there's usability, which concerns, I presume, inclusive design. So what do you prioritize, like going from AA compliance to AAA, or the usability aspect? I mean, what I understand is that users, they may not be very comfortable with like the AAA compliant things may not be as user friendly. So how do you?
So I might be viewed as quite controversial here. I think WCAG minimum standard is really, really useful, but I think the best thing you can do is product test. And like I was saying, like get in touch with DPOs, or come to Scope, or just use Twitter, ask people to test stuff. Be really open and honest, like social media is really useful for this. I think once you get sucked into WCAG and trying to get better and better, you get further away from the people that you're actually designing for. That's just my opinion. I mean, Harry might feel different.
No, I think that's true. Like it's all about empathy, right? And it's hard to kind of boil down an almost infinite range of people's experiences down to like a guideline set. I think the most fundamental thing here is like humility, right? You don't have to get it right every single time. The only thing you have to do is be open to exploring whether something you've built isn't as inclusive as it could be, and not taking it as a criticism or a personal failing if you haven't done it, but as an opportunity to learn from it and then do better going forward. And as long as you're asking the right questions, as long as you're genuinely interested in hearing what other people's opinions and experiences in using your product or service or whatever you've made is, then ultimately you're on the right track. And it's just, as Krissie said, just speaking to as many different people with different experiences as yourself as you can.
Yeah, and actually one thing that really is really frustrating, and that we're getting a lot through our reporting tool about, is that there is no two-way conversation between businesses and their users. And actually that is how you really make a great thing, like make a great service, is by opening up a feedback loop. And through our reporting tool we hear a lot that I'm experiencing this barrier, I can't check out, or I can't book this thing, and I look for a contact number, contact email, and it wasn't there. Or when it is there, I contacted them, and then they just say, accessibility is on the roadmap. And that's what really makes me sad, because I'm like, this stuff is gold dust, actually. It's quite rare that someone comes to you and says, I'm experienced. People normally just go off your website and move away. So I think just to change that thinking for businesses is actually, that feedback loop is really something special, and you should nurture that rather than just saying it's on the backlog or not picking up. Okay, we've got 2 minutes.
How do you know that?
Huh? I'm magic.
That's amazing. Oh, okay, you're over there. Oh, okay, that's how. I was really impressed.
Krissie, you both talked about this tool that you've put together for people to be able to flag accessibility issues and usability issues that come across. Now, is there any way for people like me to get access to some of these nuggets of information, because it would really help me bring things to life for my colleagues?
Absolutely. So I think the idea in the big hack is that it's totally open. We want to share the information we gather. Any barriers and trends and stories that we pick up through this reporting tool, we want to be there for, for people to use as challenges, like design challenges. So, I mean, we're building the website. Like, we can't build it fast enough, to be honest. But on the website, hopefully we'll open out all that information. For now, you can email me at bighack.org.uk, and I have a PowerPoint, an accessible PowerPoint that shows a lot of the stories and the data that we're picking up that I can send to absolutely anyone who wants it. And I'm sending it off to, YouGov did a hackathon around the whole thing, which was like just the best thing ever. It's all over Twitter if you want to look it up. And Expedia are doing one as well. So yeah, we're totally open to people picking up on this stuff.
It'd be really interesting actually to have a conversation about what it is that you think would be most useful for convincing your colleagues and talking to them. Because all of this kind of stuff and people who are going to use it in the real world is how we can then, build the next versions and see what do people want, what do people need, what's going to be the most effective and impactful. So, definitely.
Right. I think we all probably want to either get home or to the pub. So thanks for being a really awesome audience. That was really enjoyable, and we're around and happy to chat further. Thank you.
Do you know roughly when it might see the light of day?
Everything's kicking off in November. There's a conference called TechShare Pro run by AbilityNet in collaboration with Google, and we've got kind of a few big moments there where you can access our website already at bighack.org. Is it bighack.org? .uk?
.uk.
Bighack.org.
Just type Big Hack into Google.
You got it. I can put it on the Meetup.
And the reporting tool is there as well. So again, if you want to have not a play with it, because we need the data that's legit, but if you have any thoughts or feedback or criticisms or anything, then just let us know.
Yeah. So it's all out there, it's just not good enough to share too much.
Cool. Thank you very much, both.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Cool. So thank you everyone for coming. That's the end of today's meetup. So again, just a quick thank you for all of our sponsors. I haven't forgot. So Sainsbury's, Barclays, MyClearText, Meetup Video, thank you very much for all your help. And then, okay, here's some carrots. And then thank you to all the people that helped me out running this. It's not just me, so Catherine at the front, Ben, Raf, there's a light here I can't see. But yeah, it's not just me, there's like 4 or 5 people that make these events happen, so thank you to all you guys. Thank you. And then check out the YouTube channel, please, because I really want to get as a custom URL, so I need lots of people to watch the videos, post comments, and then Google will deem that we are worthy of a custom URL. Lizzie, did you want 1 minute to just say something? Yeah?
I'll just say it from here.
Okay.
So Sarah Richards, who's spoken at these events a couple of times on inclusive content design, she did the Readability Wiki. She's having a meetup tomorrow night in Waterloo Creative Studio, if anyone's around. Also, she's looking for recommendations for an accessibility testing kit. So just tweet content design London if anyone knows of that. Or just talk to me.
Yep. If you want to send us some stuff, we can put it on our Twitter account as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you all for coming. We don't have dates for August yet, but there'll be an event in August. We'll let you know. Okay, thank you.